Good morning. Welcome to November 30th PBIS Leaders Network. We hope that you all had a wonderful Thanksgiving and had a nice holiday. I hope you had some time to rest and recharge and do some wellness activities for yourself and some self-care. I know I did. I did pretty much nothing the whole time, which was actually really good for me. But welcome. We are going to be talking today about data. Data is our theme for the year for our network meetings. Last year, we talked a lot about classroom practices, and that was kind of thematic throughout the year. This year, it's going to be data. Today, we're going to be talking about attendance data a little bit, and we're going to be talking about a few other things as well. So welcome in, and we are going to start, as we always do, with an activity, welcoming, kind of a welcoming activity. So if you have not yet signed in, I know Stacy's been popping that in the chat. Please do sign in, and also access to today's materials are there as well. And I know Stacy has also put that in the chat as well. So welcome, and I'll leave that screen up just for a second in case you need access to those materials. If you will get 1 hour of contact out, one contact hour, not of contact hours, one contact hour today. If you are joining us, so make sure you sign in so you do get that one contact hour. Okay, so we are going to start with a video this morning. I stole this. I see Nicole Hassan is on the call. I stole the little, good morning, the little gratitude chart there that's on the right-hand side, because she started her last meeting the same way. But I had found this really great video that we're going to start with this morning about gratitude. And since we are in this season of giving thanks, gratitude is one way for self-care and actually to make yourself feel a little bit better if you have gratitude about things. So I'm going to hit play, and I'm just going to let you enjoy the video before we get started with the content this morning.
I realize that what I've learned over the years, I can let someone benefit out of that.
There's no one quite like Mr. Maharaj. He has been so kind, so patient in teaching us not only photography skills, but these different values that we have in life.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
He really allows us to be able to express ourselves, and I feel like we learn to appreciate more about the beauty and everything. Setting this up for a while. We collected some of his photographs.
Oh, I really like this one.
I like that one a lot. We are getting ready to surprise Mr. Maharaj, and he has absolutely no idea.
I'm just really excited to see his shock in his face, and I feel like this is a great way to say thank you for everything you've done for us.
Whoa, there's a new photograph there. What's this photograph?
What?
This is when they used to check the passes in South Africa.
That's one of my shots.
This is your shot?
Yeah, I didn't know they had it.
Wow.
Whoa, oh my God. Wow.
Go check him out. Come on.
There's Bob Marley. Bishop Tutu, one of the nicest guys in the world. This is amazing. I've never seen anything like this before in my life. Whoa, you're all ditching school?
Mr. Maharaj, we feel like you are such a great teacher and such a great photographer, but we do feel like your best work is shown here.
What's this?
Mr. Maharaj, thank you for inspiring me.
You're so inspirational.
You were the best teacher I ever had in high school.
Thank you for always being one of my biggest supporters and believing in me.
Thank you for teaching me all these new things in photography.
Mr. Maharaj, thank you so much for everything you did for us, and most importantly, what you're doing for students now.
For me personally, you inspired me to follow my dreams, and even through my college experience now, I feel like I've never had a teacher who was that passionate about their work.
Thank you, Mr. Maharaj.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
You have been such an inspiration to more people than you know, and we would all like to show you how much we appreciate you.
What's this? guys all kept this away from me, you're gonna be in trouble, man. Thank you, you guys. The feeling is just amazing. I feel so honored. I mean, I always tell my students how lucky I am to be a teacher. A teacher is the one that makes the difference in your life. And I hope to do the best I can for them. A group hug, group hug, group hug.
So I'm having issues with sound this morning. So I've watched the video a couple times, but I wasn't able to listen to it while you guys were watching this morning. And I'm glad, because the last time I watched it, I cried like a baby. So I hope you guys appreciated a little bit of, and what we would like to say thank you for everything that you do. We are very thankful to work with the wonderful districts that we get to work with every day. I'm particularly thankful for everybody I work with, including the team here at the SST. Thank you. And I have a lot of gratitude for all the wonderful people that I get to work with as well. So thank you. So in this season of gratitude, take a minute to be thankful for something. It will make you feel like a million times better, and it will change your outlook. You know, there is some research saying if you're grateful for something for like 21 days in a row, you say thank you, or you have gratitude, that it actually will change the chemistry in your brain. So it's really, really important. The other thing I wanted to share before we jump into the content this morning is this video I found on the first five. I know that you guys, everybody on this call, I think generally does get my emails that I send periodically for PBIS. And the first five is something that I have included in the last email that I sent and several emails before that. If your teachers are not using it, it is a great free resource that has SEL and PBIS type activities that are already completely done. There's no planning involved, and it gets delivered to your inbox every morning, I think around 7 a.m. And so it's nice because it's set up with elementary activities and secondary activities, and it only takes 5 minutes. So it might be a meme that you discuss with the students. It might be a video like this one. It might be activities that you do to make connection in your classroom. Really, really a great resource. You just go in and put your email in, and I would heavily suggest that if you guys are not using it, to have your teachers, remind your teachers this is a really, really a great resource for them to use. So that comes from the first five. Love that resource. Stephanie Martinez turned us on to that. For those of you who've been with us for a while, she's the person that we did restorative practices with. So please utilize that. It's free. Okay, so here's our agenda for today. We are going to start with a little bit of data this morning regarding attendance and chronic absenteeism. We're going to talk a little bit about state and regional updates and some things that we're thinking about doing as a region to see if it's helpful for you, and then upcoming events that we have coming up. So I believe I am going to turn it to Stacy, and I will be your Vanna, Stacy. So take it away.
Thanks, Heidi. Well, good morning. It's nice to be here today. As we were talking about different data that impacts students and impacts districts and connects to PBIS, one of the things that really became clear to us is chronic absenteeism. And so this morning we wanted to take a look at how do those two things connect. And I think, I hope, like what has happened to me as I've been learning about chronic absenteeism, I just keep thinking PBIS because there's such a strong connection to what you're doing and building through the framework to supporting kids to come to school. So let's go ahead and jump in. So the first thing we just wanted to start with is chronic absenteeism. What is it? Why does it matter? How can you access the data around chronic absenteeism? And then what are those connections to PBIS? So those are kind of the four things we're going to be looking through this morning as we just share some information. What do you see on the slide here is Ohio's attendance guide. And if you haven't had a chance to look at this, I would really encourage you to follow the link that's on this slide and look at it. A lot of what I'm going to share this morning comes directly from the Ohio attendance guide. Ohio has partnered with Attendance Works and is really making an effort to make this information accessible and also make it easy to read and really start to think about how you can implement some practices that will make sure students are coming to school. Because we know there's such a strong connection between kids being in school, receiving instruction, and then the outcomes that happen from them being in school. So those of you that have been around with us in the network, this slide should look familiar. We spent one whole year in the network looking at whole child and what are the tenets of the whole child and how does that connect to PBIS. So the 5 tenets of the whole child are challenged, safe, healthy, engaged, and supported. And I don't know about you, but when I read those slides, that just jumps out to me again about thinking about the framework, about providing a safe environment, thinking about students coming and being engaged and supported. And again, it just continues to make me think about what practices are we already putting in place that support that and how do those two things go together. So we wanted to start by just sharing a little bit about why does this matter? So this is just a slide showing you in Ohio, students who have been chronically absent and the way this has changed through the years. And you can see, obviously, the pandemic has impacted this. But when you look at those numbers for 22, 23, although it's starting to come down, 26.8% of students are chronically absent. 26.8%, that's huge. And so this is part of the why is if this many kids are chronically absent, why is this happening and how can we help address this? So on the next slide, I'd really like for you to take a look at this slide. And this obviously is showing the different grade bands and absentee levels. And I would love for you just to look at this slide and either drop in the chat or feel free to unmute and just share what is your reaction to this slide. Because I know those of us that have been looking at this data have had some pretty strong reactions when we looked at this slide. So I'm going to give you a minute to just look at this and process. And then if you would like to unmute and share or drop something in the chat, would love to hear your response. What do people notice about this when they look at the grade bands? Where is chronic absenteeism the highest? And does this surprise you at all? So Emily said high school, that doesn't surprise her. Kindergarten data is interesting and surprising, exactly. And Nicole agreeing, kindergarten and 12th are almost equally poor. Those numbers are so similar. And that has really stood out to us as well. And myself as being someone who is focused on early learning, you know, you think kindergarten, kids aren't coming to kindergarten, what's happening? Frank, yep, we've had that conversation quite often about kindergarten and the number of kids having sicknesses and not getting to school. What about any reactions to where it dips down? Any thoughts about why that might occur?
I think having been a prior first and second grade teacher in younger kids is that I think they're more excited to be at school at that point. I think when they start having learning difficulties, that when they start having to do independent work and feeling frustrated with that, I see that it's slowly, I feel like they're still excited to learn at that point. And I think they like to go to school.
Thanks, Danielle. That's a good reflection. And I like where you pointed out too, because when they're younger, the work isn't as independent, is it? It isn't quite as challenging. And as they get older, it starts to become more independent, more rigorous. Oh, that's a good point, Nicole. I think the K2 are rebuilding immunity right now. They were so much more isolated in their toddler years. That's a great consideration. Yep. And we definitely have seen, because of COVID and some of the policies that were in place around kids not being able to come to school, how much of that has carried over. And so kids are still not coming to school when they might have a sniffle, something like that. And is that appropriate or not appropriate? How do they know when to send kids or not to send kids? And so definitely some different considerations. But again, this data, it always, every time we look at this, it just stands out to me that it's highest in K and 12. I mean, that just really, really stands out that they're almost equal.
And Stacy, I'm seeing also in the chat, families might still be worried about possible COVID and safety, separation anxiety in K1. In younger grades, it's really up to their parents to get them to school. And then 8th grade, more peer issues come up. So maybe that's why we're seeing, those teenage years, being a middle school teacher. Oh yeah. And there's a lot of those social issues coming up at that time too.
Yeah,
and then
those are all great points.
Yep. Social media. We still have more and more comments coming in the chat there.
Yeah, and Carrie also it's just kindergarten, so they don't think it's that important. And yet we know how important those early years are. They're so important. So part of the reason we wanted to share this data with you is as we move forward to the next slide, do you know the chronic absence rate in the district where you work or in the schools you work? And do key staff in the district know chronic absenteeism rates for the district and building? Because one of the things that is very clear is this is not just an issue for whoever's in charge of attendance in the district. This is important for every single person who works in the district, regardless of the role, to be a part of understanding the importance of kids coming to school. So I'm actually going to pass this off to Frank and let him share a little bit of how can you see this data? How can you find what your rate is in your district?
So today we're going to show you 3 different pathways to find some individual data for your building or your district. The first one is pretty simple, and each one will have different uses. So in this case, how do you get to each one of these pathways? It's pretty simple. If you go to the Department of Education and Workforce website, you'll click on where it says school report cards. Top right-hand corner, you'll have a list of things, the drop-down menu. And in this case, we're going to start with the advanced reports. So you'll click the advanced reports. Then you'll next have the option of choosing our public data or non-public, and there's some other options there. In this case, we're going to choose the public data. And to be more specific, we're also going to choose, in this case, student attendance. Later on, we'll get into the different dashboards. After you click the student attendance, you'll get this nice piece of information. It's really quick. This is great for you're on the go, or you want to just grab some information to share out, whether in your TBTs, BLTs, or actually in your DLTs. What's nice about this one, it does disaggregate the data for you. You look at different school years, you look at the gender, you can look at grade levels, how that applies directly to your particular building. What's nice about this one is it's right there. It's summed up in one nice location. Bad thing is it doesn't transfer over very well if you do a screenshot or if you try to export that. This information does not come out very clean, but this is a nice little one-stop shop when you're focusing solely on attendance itself.
So as we look at that data, one of the things that you might have noticed on there is that there are several different types of attendance that are noted. There's several different pieces of information. And one of the things that we just wanted to help clarify is that when we're talking about chronic absenteeism, what exactly is that? In this slide, I liked how this kind of makes it succinct and simple to understand that chronic absenteeism is missing so much school for any reason that a student is academically at risk. And so that means if it's any reason and it adds up to 10% or more, that's chronic absenteeism. So you can see in this graphic that it says excused absences. So even students who have, medical excuse, been to the doctor, they have legitimate excuses. Those days or hours are still counted towards chronic absenteeism. So it's excused absence, unexcused absence, and suspension. That's another piece to consider, because that is something that's definitely in control within the district, within the school, is suspension. Because if you're putting kids out, that also goes into that total calculation for chronic absence. And so that is how chronic absence is different from truancy, which when we're looking at like that unexcused absence only, or average daily attendance, how many kids are showing up each day. Each piece of that data is important to understand, but when we say chronic absenteeism, we're saying they're missing 10% or more for any reason overall, because regardless of the reason, if they're not there, they're missing the instruction and what's actually happening at the school that day. So
Stacey,
on the next,
do
yeah,
you
go
mind
ahead,
if
Frank.
I just chime in for a moment there
Sure.
too? That's where an area too that you need to make sure that everybody is in line across the district in the building, especially your secretaries or your attendance secretaries, making sure that common language and everybody's calibrated across. So if a child's on a field trip or a job visit, those are not going to count towards your chronic absenteeism. So making sure things are actually coded correctly is going to be important, through this process.
That's a great point, Frank. Thanks for sharing that, because there really does need to be that consistency across the district, across the building, and who's entering the information so that we're sure we have the correct data to look at. So as we move forward to the next slide, one of the things that is really important to think about is that those absences add up, and they add up pretty quickly, because it's easy to think, oh, they're just missing 2 or 3 days a year, even from a parent perspective, or 2 or 3 days a month, like, oh, they're missing a day here and there. It's not that big of a deal. But if you think of that, that could be adding up to 10% of the school year, 18 days of absence. That's almost a whole month of missed instruction. So again, when we stop and really think about what does that mean for students to be missing school, and really starting to think about how do those absences add up and what impact does that have? So one of the nice things that Ohio has done, as I said, they've partnered with Attendance Works, and they have shared this pathway for change. And this was one of the first places I had shared with Heidi and our PBIS team. As soon as I started to see this, I was like, oh, this is starting to look like PBIS language to me, starting to make those connections. Because really, when we're thinking about getting to the point of outcomes, you have to go backwards and look at where does it start. And it really starts with mindset. And that's something we talk so much about, the P, positive, right? Positive behavior interventions and support. We talk about the mindset and the mindset of the adults that are working with the children, because that mindset then impacts all the way to what the outcomes are. So this pathway for change starts with mindset, but then really starts to talk about what is the data? What actionable data do we have? Which is what Frank had shared a little bit about, and we're going to look at that a little deeper. But then once we look at the data, what capacity do we have? How do we take this information and really start to align it to things we're already doing, such as implementing it within the PBIS framework? And then how do those strategies align? Where can we embed strategies? What do those look like so that we do ensure getting positive outcomes? So as we start to think about mindset, it's really shifting to a positive problem-solving approach. And again, with PBIS, we talk all the time about positive. That's the P in PBIS. So typically, there's just a real trend and real easy to fall back on attendance issues and saying it's the parent's fault, or thinking about not actually even having conversations with parents, but just using those robocalls that communicate to parents that kids haven't been at school, and missing that personal connection, that relationship connection. But really starting to think about how can we look at the problem solving approach? How can we look at building those relationships with families? Because when I think about PBIS, 2 things that always stand out to me are environments and relationships. And so as we think about attendance, how do we make those relationships strong, and how do we make those environments a place where kids want to come? They feel safe, they're predictable, it's consistent, all the tenets of PBIS. How do we work on those things to be looking at that problem solving approach? Some of the other things that we typically would look at are only looking at the kids that are at that tier 3 or habitually truant, and thinking about House Bill 410 and all those, pieces and parts of the letters we have to send, and, have they reached the point of truancy that now they have to go to court? But instead looking at that prevention, and again, thinking, how do we put things in place from the start so we can prevent having so many kids needing that level of intervention? And then typically in the past, we've really only thought about one person in each school addressing attendance. And really, if we're going to think about this holistically, this needs to be a district-wide approach, a building-wide approach, and every single person impacts kids coming to school. whether you are the bus driver, whether you are the classroom teacher, whether you work in the office, whether you're the administrator, every single person needs to be aware of the impact of attendance and building those relationships and making that environment a place where kids want to come and want to be. So this next slide is really the one that, as I started to think about chronic absenteeism and how do we build supports, when I saw the language on this and saw the triangle, of course, a triangle makes me think of PBIS. This is really getting at that idea of the capacity and then the strategies. So thinking of the capacity of how can we put in place things to support this, and really starting at that foundational support level at the very bottom of the triangle before we would even get to thinking about tier 1 universal prevention, but really thinking about how do we promote those positive conditions for learning. And again, that takes me back to those 2 key components that I keep thinking about with PBIS, about that environment and those relationships. What can we do to make sure we are promoting those positive conditions within the school so that all students and all families feel welcome, feel that this is a place they want their children to come and that they can enter into those doors? Because one of the things that we really need to stop and consider is, why do kids not come? And is there a bigger issue? Is there an issue? Maybe the parent had a horrible experience with school and just really is afraid to come to the school. They had their own personal bad experience. So how do we start to bridge that? Or maybe there truly are some health concerns going on, but what can we do to think about, is there a way to make it a more accessible place for students? Or maybe there's a transportation issue that you're not aware of, and that's preventing kids from getting to school. So really starting to think about those foundational pieces before we even start to look at a tiered approach of universal prevention, then early intervention, and then that real intensive intervention as kids are missing more and more school. So I really, this quote resonated with me. This is right out of the attendance guide, and I put the page number for you as well. But you can see on this, I'm going to read this, and I just want you, as I read it, think through every word that stands out to you as a connection to PBIS. A district-wide emphasis on prevention and early intervention will have a greater impact on the chronic absence rate versus sole compliance with Ohio's attendance laws. Districts should consider how attendance can be aligned with or integrated into existing collaborative efforts, such as positive behavior intervention and support or multi-tiered systems of supports. When I read that, not only does it align with our thinking about let's not start something new and separate, but really think about that capacity and how do we embed supports into what we're already doing, but also just that idea of that emphasis on prevention, early intervention, and the impact that can have. Again, that is so much what the PBIS framework is built on, is that if we're putting things in universally, that if it's working and we're doing really what we should be doing, and we have the conditions set, then that universal piece is really going to impact probably at least 80% of kids. So thinking about that from this perspective of chronic absenteeism and what can we put in place to support that and align that to the framework and what we're already doing just really makes a lot of sense. So this slide, again, positive conditions for learning lead to students being engaged and attending regularly. And I think the key on this slide is that it's not only kids coming to school, but once they're there, they're actually engaged. And what does that look like? What does that mean? And you can see in these concentric circles that we're really going back to that whole child framework and thinking about all the areas that impact and come together. But what really, again, stands out to me, and I know it's a little hard to see, but the line that comes out from there says, relationships are essential to positive conditions for learning. And so once again, that mindset, the adults, the importance of how are adults interacting with children, how are adults interacting with the families, and how are those relationships being built? Because when kids have strong relationships, it ties right back to that video that Heidi shared at the beginning. Those kids loved the teacher because of the relationship, and they went above and beyond to show their appreciation for him. And just again, how do we build those relationships so that kids have that desire to be at school, to see those adults, to be connected to people who they know care about them? And so this looks at so many pieces of this, look at, restorative check-ins, which again are a part of the framework, looking at a welcoming, safe climate. Safe is part of what we're trying to build through the framework. Having those positive engagements in that positive environment, again, connects to what you're trying to build. So as we build those pieces through the framework, there is going to be that connection. And one of the things I wanted to share, and I know that both Frank and Carrie are on the call. One of the things that their building has done is really to connect the PBIS framework with chronic absenteeism and the absenteeism piece, and really looked at what are we already doing and how do we connect it. So they took their acknowledgement system that they already had in place because of PBIS and acknowledging expectations. And they chose to, on a certain day, we're going to acknowledge every student that comes to school using that same acknowledgement system. And so really taking something they already had in place and then transferring that over to encompass chronic absenteeism and the absenteeism and acknowledging kids for coming to school and tying that to the expectation that when you come to school, you know, what would that match in your district? If you're coming to school, does that make you responsible? Does that make you, you know, how does that tie in and how can you just support that from what you're already doing? So the final piece I wanted to share is just a couple specifics when we think about how can schools in Ohio improve attendance. And again, I wanted to keep pointing you back to that attendance guide because that's where this information has come from. That's where it's all the research that they've done and really put it into a nice format so it's easy to access. But these are some of the pieces that schools can really start to think about. Prioritizing attendance and engagement, like we talked about. Promoting school-wide climate of attendance. So just even that example of what I just shared that, you know, the school is doing where they're acknowledging kids for coming to school, shifting that focus from to prevention and early intervention instead of waiting until kids have missed so much school, and really looking at that positive problem-solving approach instead of only relying on the legal and punitive actions. And then really looking at students as families as a part of the solution instead of just thinking that's the problem, but how can we work with them to make that a part of the solution? And then really the next piece is the data-driven team approach. And that's something that we're going to take a little deeper look. Frank's going to walk us through looking at that data and what data can support as you look through this. And then finally, engaging every person in the school building, because this really does impact everybody, and every adult that crossed paths with a student impacts that student. So those are just some of the pieces that really align in my mind, and I hope in yours, to what you're already working on through PBIS and building your framework, but then also layering in how can we connect that to chronic absenteeism and really making that connection for our students and families. So I'm going to pass this over to Frank, and he's going to walk us through how you can access data in just a little deeper manner.
So we're going to show you the second pathway, and then I'll actually demonstrate the third pathway of getting data. Now, we love data, and in fact, I love looking at data, and you can get really immersed yourself and go down that rabbit hole and be there forever. It's going to be important for us as administrators or former administrators or leaders of the teams to kind of determine what data really we should focus in on for our team to move forward. This is lag data, so this is data that's already occurred, but it's good for us to kind of get a history of it and kind of dig a little bit deeper to figure out what are our focuses going to be moving forward. So the second pathway is going to be really more focused towards our school district report card and, you know, how we can access some of that. So that same pathway you went before, this one we go into the different reports, and there's a plethora of different information you can access from that. So you can pick what year, you could pick district data or school level data. And if we're looking for a gap closing data, we would either determine from our district details data or the gap closing data to figure out, further disaggregate that. What's nice about these reports is they come in an Excel file, and you can go ahead and you can clip, you can hide, you can move things around, and that's easy to transfer to other information other ways. There's no graphs in those, but it's nice to have just that plain data to use in different capacities. So in this case, this is where you're just looking for the numbers. You want to, you know, export those numbers, utilize them to some capacity. I will forewarn you a little bit when you look in school building data, especially if it's disaggregated, you're looking at all the different subgroups. times the number of schools. So you're going to have thousands and thousands. So if you don't know how to use a search function within Excel, that might be a little bit more of a challenge. But, this is a great one to kind of pull some data to kind of share in a table format. I'm going to go ahead. Oh, there's the table format that we're kind of pulling out. So that's one example of how that disaggregated data could look if you're looking at some of that report card data directly from that. Heidi, do you have the ability for me to kind of go ahead and share my screen now?
I believe Stacy made you co-host, so I will stop sharing my screen. And I believe if you are a co-host, you should be able to share your screen because I believe Stacy gave you that access.
All right, perfect. All right, so now another one that we can get in a third pathway. So if you go to the Department of Education and Workforce, once again, we go to our school report card. We're going to click the advanced reports, the public, and then we're going to scroll down. You'll have a couple of different options here. If you haven't been in here already as an administrator, you're going to love these. The district dashboard or the school dashboard. I'm going to just click the school dashboard for a moment. It'll take a moment to load. What's nice about this recovery dashboard is it has trend data and you can isolate things even further into your subgroups. So just for purposes, since we've been talking about chronic absenteeism, we're going to stay in chronic absenteeism. In this case, I'm going to choose a school. Let's go with something. Oh, there we go. Let's go early college high school. So inside early college high school, we can look at a variety of different information. We can choose subgroups. Let's say as a team, we're looking through and we have I wonder how this applies to gender. So within that, I can compare and I can look at the gender comparisons of how attendance or chronic absenteeism is applied between the girls and the boys, which is interesting. You have an opportunity to look and you make some additional questions or wonders from that. You can even break that down by, well, in this case, we know that's a high school. We can look at it by different grade levels, how that changes over time. So as you have your team meeting, you can break this information down based on the conversations that you're having at the moment. It's very responsive in that case. Or if you want, you can even get into looking at how this applies compared to our county. So I'm going to pull up Summit County real quick. And so you can look at different schools within Summit County and how that applies. Within this dashboard, there's plenty of different information in there or different things that you can look at. You can look at from test results to look at kindergarten, early screening. You can look at enrollment numbers, graduation. So it is very, very large little dashboard that allows you to kind of dig in a little bit. You can get lost. You can go in that rabbit hole, but it's an excellent piece for people to utilize within that team setting, very responsive to whatever the questions that might be within the team. So those are just some different pathways to get information. Once again, the key to this is not spend an abundance of time looking at old data. You're looking at that lag data, that old data to kind of determine, hey, what's our focus area? And then now we can start determining strategies and planning strategies for the future. And then as we come up with our individual data to look at on a regular basis, how does that inform us to see if that changes, that lag data in the future? So questions about those pathways?
Feel free to use the chat or unmute. So as we kind of wrap up, I'll throw it back to Stacy and or Frank to talk about the the resources that are here for you. If you have a question, please, you can go ahead and pop that in the chat anytime or unmute. We're pretty laid back here. So Stacy, I'll throw it back to you.
Thanks, Heidi. So we wanted to share with you too, there's so many resources out there right now. And every time we start to look at some resources, more resources are provided. But these are some of the ones that are out there that you can access. Many of you, I'm sure, have heard of the Stay in the Game Network because that's affiliated with the Cleveland Browns. Attendance Works, which is what a lot of the slides I shared with you today are from. Then there's different toolkits and programs and playbooks. And the nice thing is, as you go through these, they already have resources built. They already have handouts and flyers and things you could send in an email. Just even some of that data that we shared with, the number of days, missing 2 or 3 days a month, how that adds up. They have that in nice graphics that you can share that look appropriate for maybe elementary or maybe for an older school. They have some different things like agreements that you can make with a family about getting their kids to school, kind of a pledge that they take. There's an attendance pledge you as adults can take. So there's just so many different supports that are out there. And we just wanted to give you access to those that you can just click and look at some of those. So again, like we said, we hope that this is a good connection for you as you're doing work within the framework. I know Heidi and I have often had conversations even with when we're looking at the whole child and we're looking at the PBIS framework and we start to look at those tiers, chronic absenteeism or attendance issues really do at times become more of a tier 2, possibly even a tier 3 issue for a student. And so looking at digging deeper as to why is that happening, what's going on, and is that an intervention that then connects to your tiered framework. So those are all the resources we wanted to share with you around chronic absenteeism. If you have any questions, feel free, drop them in the chat. And I'll let Heidi take over the next part.
Thanks, Stace. And I think, there was a middle school that I was working with that actually, as Stacy talked about tier 2, they really were using their check and check out to bolster attendance for students who are struggling coming to school. And the reason why it was successful for that middle school was because teachers were making, again, relationships with the student, and they wanted to make sure they got to school so as not to disappoint the adult in their life in the middle school. So I think it's really important, as Stacy talked about, and Frank as well, that core environment, those foundational pieces are there so that kids want to come to school, but then really thinking about what is the reason for students not coming to school, and how are we digging down to find out what really is that, we talk about function of behavior, what is that function of behavior? So as we continue on, if you have questions, please feel free to post them in the chat or unmute, but we're gonna go on to our second part of our network this morning, and that is some state and regional updates for you. So on the next couple of slides, within our own PBIS team here at the SST, there's a couple things that we've been thinking about. The first thing is high schools. So for those of you in districts that are working with your high school, we always know that high school is a tough environment to implement PBIS, right? Sometimes it's more of a mindset, sometimes it's more of a logistical issue. So some of you on this call, I know for sure, have been attending the Midwest PBIS high school think tanks, and they occur once a month, and they're like at 12:30 in the middle of the day. So we had a discussion at our last internal meeting. Would having some sort of Region 8 network just for high schools be beneficial? I see some shaking heads already. So we're going to throw this out to you guys, and please feel free to unmute or pop in the chat. Would your local high schools be interested in doing something locally where they would have an opportunity to network? So I'm going to stop talking for a minute. Please utilize the chat or unmute and let us know what your thoughts are about that. Okay, Erica Bauer already in the chat put yes. Any other thoughts about, but something that is after school? Okay, thanks, Nicole. Time is such a struggle.
I wonder if it's something that maybe is like these networks where it's like monthly on the same day and time, so that administrators can plan for it, because they often have so many things that they deal with every day after school, and that consistency might help more attend.
Okay. So it's sounding to me like if after school probably would be better. So what I'm thinking is I'm hearing some positives. So what I think what we could do is put together a Google form and ask just some questions about, what time would be better? Are there days of the month that would be better? And then I think what I would like to do is I would like to get, like, who should we be talking to? You guys generally are district folks that are on this call, not all, but most of you guys are district folks. I would like to get maybe some information about who at the building level should we be reaching out to see what is really best for them. So I think what we could do at this point in time is probably as an internal team here at SST, put together a couple of questions that we're going to send you, and maybe we might ask you to send on to your high schools to see what might be best. But what if you haven't been to the think tanks, basically what they do is it is a resource that comes to us, and there are people from around the country that join on from Midwest PBIS. Midwest PBIS is really the one, or I mean, it might be APBS are the ones that put it on. And basically what they do is they open up a Zoom meeting. They ask people, what are you struggling with? Throw it in the chat. And all they do is they open up breakout rooms to say, if you're struggling with this, meet with people who are also have questions about this particular issue. And then they do some brainstorming and they do some networking. And then they come back at the end and kind of said, and say, what did you guys talk about? Did you guys come up with any solutions? Nicole has asked, couldn't we include middle school? I think absolutely middle school and high school, probably. Maybe we call it a middle school, high school network. I don't think that's a problem. And we can put that also in our questionnaire. I think that would be great. So thank you very much for helping us kind of think through this, because these are things that we think about on our end, but quite frankly, we're not in the buildings anymore. So we want to be responsive to your needs, but sometimes we're not quite sure, what those needs are. I just know particularly, and I know Mike is on the call as well, that being from a high school background, that, sometimes it's just more difficult in high school and sometimes middle school too. So what we will do following this meeting is I will send a follow-up. I'm going to send a follow-up to the entire network. If you are not on my network list, please email me so I can get you on my network list. And my email is heidik@sst8.org. I will send out, following this meeting, a recording of today's meeting, as well as a link to a questionnaire regarding the high school stuff. And please fill that out if you think that it would be valuable to you. We really want to be responsive to your needs, and we want to make sure it's not a waste of people's time. But again, we find that the high school is always such it's tough to implement PBIS in the high school. Yeah, and TJ's point is that it's in the middle school that students begin the process of thinking about dropping out, for sure. So thank you for that. The other thing that we're thinking about is, and I'm sure you guys are feeling it because you are reporting to us that you're feeling it, is that we are seeing more explosive behavior at earlier grades, at later grades too, but we're seeing it at earlier grades as well. So the other thing we're thinking about, and we don't have anything planned for this, but we're thinking about what kind of supports could we provide with networking opportunities for folks to talk about these behaviors that are happening at earlier grades, and what kind of supports that maybe that you need. Could we do some networking to kind of talk about that? So Stacy, I'm going to throw it back to you for a minute to, is there anything else you want to talk about as far as that one is concerned?
Sure. And isn't it interesting that the two areas we're focused on the early grades and then high school aligned to the chronic absenteeism,
Absolutely,
right?
yeah.
Completely aligned. One of the things that we've been hearing pretty consistently, and when we say early, we mean early. We're talking preschool K1. Like, we're hearing in the youngest grades, the behaviors are really exploding, and not just typical behaviors that people were seeing in the past, but really aggressive behaviors that are causing teams and buildings to really have to think about what do we do? How do we manage this behavior? So again, as Heidi said, we don't have a solution at this point in time, but we just really, we're hearing this from more than one district. And so we thought, PBIS makes the network makes a good place to maybe throw this out to all of you and see, is there a need for this that you would like to come together with your colleagues to kind of, brainstorm, think through, maybe look at a book study. I don't know, like something around that to just see what can you do to support those challenging behaviors in the youngest learners. So again, if that's something that you're interested in, we can follow up with that as well.
Yep. And maybe, Stace, that's something we could add to the I don't know if that would be it. Maybe we can construct two separate surveys so that things don't get mixed up, but we can talk about that to figure out what people might need. Okay, and I am seeing some yes in the chat that people might be interested in opportunities to really network around some of these chronic and serious behaviors, that we're seeing. And again, we realize it's through all the grades, but we're really seeing kind of a disturbing trend at the earlier grades, sooner and more intense behaviors we're seeing. And then we're going to kind of finish today with some helpful links or resources for you guys this morning. These are all live linked here for you. So when you make sure that you do get a digital copy of the PowerPoint today, so you can have these links. But the first one is the TFI, for those of you who don't know, and I don't know if anybody still doesn't know, the tiered fidelity inventory is in a phase right now where they are looking to change it. And quite frankly, what I've seen and what my colleagues have seen is that the changes that they are proposing are quite different than what we've seen in the original TFI. The reason why it is not out yet, and I think the original goal was for them to have the new version out by like this fall, is because I think they still need to do more research on it. So the validation study is still open. If you are a building that might want to do the validation study, that link will take you to how you can register for that. I will warn you, my colleagues know this as well, is that the changes are they're intense, and the changes really are reflective of mental health support, whole child support, restorative practice support that your buildings could talk through with the TFI. But that link will take you to a place where, if you are willing to do it, you're not going to get anything really but accolades. You're not going to get, I don't think there's really any money or anything tied to it, but and also more focus on classroom supports and community support as well, as TJ put in the chat. But if your building is interested, and it is at the building level, that link is there for you. And if you have other questions, please feel free to reach out to me or anybody else on the team after this meeting. If you're considering doing it, we can answer any kind of questions that you might have. The OLAC PBIS conference in January, the registration is now open. That link will take you to the registration page if you want to attend. It is again virtual this year, which is a little bit of a disappointment to me. I've always appreciated going in person to that conference, but from when I ask about it, they always tell me they reach more people virtually, so that will be virtual. There will be, like any conference, there will be like main sessions or keynotes, and then there will be small sessions from schools that will be presenting some of their best practices there. So that is open if you want. I have not registered myself, to be honest. I need to go on there and register. And usually that conference is in December. They have pushed it back to January. It is in January this year. Those of you who do get my emails, you should have seen last time that there was a student voice nomination in there. And I think Zach Miley from the Summit ESC did put that out to his network as well. They are looking for students to serve on kind of like a committee to talk about what their experience is like in school, and to get some feedback for them. Today is the deadline for that if you're going to nominate a student. So that is something also that you might be interested in. And that link is there again. Unfortunately, today is the deadline for that student. And Stacy is popping those links in the chat. I am going to mute myself, and I'm going to throw it over to Mike because he has our last resource. So Mike, give me 1 second to mute, and I'll let you talk about our last resource.
Thank you, Heidi. Good morning, everyone. I just wanted to share our last resource today. Many of you probably already received this, but I can't assume anything. But the ASCD leadership, I don't know if you can see the cover there. This issue of EL, Educational Leadership, landed in my mailbox, and I have not been able to put it down. It's kind of like one of those favorite children's books that you keep looking at, even though you know what's in there. It is an excellent resource, and I hope some of you have already received it. But the whole issue is about the challenge of challenging behavior, and it offers some strategies for all stakeholders involved with dealing with behaviors in schools. The strategies include differentiating the whole idea is to differentiate discipline like we do when we differentiate academic content. So it's about that whole shift that we talk about here in the network. It gives you strategies about committing to restorative practices and building relationships. We heard the group talk about that very today, about relationships, how important relationships are, but not only establishing those relationships and building them, but also building accountability for students and behavior. Also strategies about getting to the root cause of behavior and academics. There's a great piece in there about behavioral issues and how they correspond to executive functioning and memory issues in students. There's also strategies for teaching perspective and talking skills and helping students understand the impact of their actions.